Hey Rob, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, Kevin.
Yeah, great to have everybody back. Another episode of Mass Tangent. I'm Kevin Leeper, technical sales advisor with Winfield. This is Rob Garcia. What's up,
Hello,
Rob?
everyone. Hope everybody's having a good morning.
Yeah, last we spoke, we were talking about heat stress, and now we've got some fall turf management program questions, practices that we'd like to discuss. I felt like it'd probably be best to get going with some aeration discussion. What do you think about
Sure.
that?
No, I think that's great. And like we were talking about before we started recording, how everybody's so fired up in the spring to do stuff with their yard. They're coming out of winter. They're ready to get outside, ready to work in the yard. Then we go through a hot summer, and during the summer, we had to battle heat. Maybe they do or don't have irrigation, but all those factors come into play. It's hard to get the lawn through the summer and all over the United States. And then now we're coming into fall. Well, a lot of times in the fall, the yard will somewhat get neglected. So Kevin's going to start out talking about some cultural practices and aeration and why it's so important to help us maintain good, healthy turf grass in our yards.
Yeah, well, kind of touching on what you just mentioned, people get all fired up and then they go through this tough summer, and your root system has decreased so much with heat stress, lack of water, etc. In the fall, that's when you really need to build up your root system. And one of the ways that you can do that is with aeration. You want to open up space in the soil, uh, get water moving into the soil, get more air in the soil, open up space so that the roots can grow down. So, with home lawns, you've got excessive thatch, you've got compaction, you've got compaction due to a lot of things, like maybe they just have never aerated, or maybe it's a new build and they just pile up all that excess backfill right on the top of your lawn and don't put any topsoil down. So you're dealing with a whole bunch of different type of particle sizes and soil types that you have really, no idea what you're looking at until you get down and dig into it. So aerating opens up that space. It allows you to look at the soil profile and say, I've got a lot of clay. I need to get out here and aerate some more. Or I've got sand that maybe I don't need to aerate as much, but I need to water more. So a lot of
Sure,
people don't
sure.
understand what their soil type is unless they get down into it and look at the soil profile.
Especially with new construction, like you said, where you know what they do. They scrape it, they throw down the sod, they move on. So you need to start taking care of your yard immediately. And with old lawns, Kevin mentioned thatch, and basically thatch is that undecomposed organic matter between the blade and the crown, and it accumulates over time. So if you cut a plug out of an old lawn, you'll see that it might be 2 or 3 inches. Ultimately, you like about a half inch. It does give it some durability. So managing your thatch is something that we have to also remember. The thatch is hydrophobic, so it doesn't like to let water down. So when you are watering in the summer, you have to get the water through the thatch. So controlling your thatch, and it's an ideal time to do it.
For
So
sure.
what do you want to go into the two types of aeration, Kevin?
Yeah, definitely. So you've got different methods of aerating. There's hollow tine, solid tine. Other people would ask about spike aerification, and that's kind of a different animal, but we can touch on that a little bit. So I think mostly with home lawns, you're not going to see solid tine too much. That's mostly a golf course thing that has
Sure.
become more popular, and they're dealing with different things. The maintenance is a little bit uh their expectations are a little bit higher, so they don't want to have to deal with all the plugs, and
Right.
that just helps speed up the process for them. But with home lawns specifically, looking at hollow tine is probably the way to go. And you're going to have little plugs everywhere, but that's really not a big deal for most homeowners.
They're unsightly for a couple of weeks. They dry out fairly rapid, start to break down, start to move back down through the leaf blade and down to the soil surface. So if it's a little unsightly, even a lot of golf courses will hollow tine their fairways once a year to remove the material, and they'll clean the plugs up. So if you don't like the plugs, you can always rake them up. They dry out in a couple of days, and they're pretty easy to collect. But ultimately, they're just returning organic matter back to the soil. So they really don't need to be collected.
Yeah,
So
and one thing I would mention with aerating for home lawns and do-it-yourselfers, make sure you're going around looking for any irrigation heads or know where your lines are at and any underground cables and such. So you don't want to hit anything and cause an issue. So get out
sure.
there and
Oh
do
yeah.
that prep work before you get out with the aerator.
So you don't have to dig up and replace all the heads in your yard because you broke them with the aerator.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
One of the things that we talked about is also the idea of the liquid aeration now. It's becoming, seems like, more and more popular around the United States. We're seeing more lawn maintenance companies start to advertise liquid aeration. And do you want to go a little bit into exactly what we were talking about when we say liquid aeration?
Yeah, so liquid aeration is part of the program, I guess you could call it, with aerating. I wouldn't use it entirely as your program because it's been shown that mechanical aeration, removing the cores or punching holes, is going to give you better soil, air, and water movement than just using a liquid aeration product. But essentially, you can go out and use these type of products to help move water through the soil, get some more humate material and organic matter down into the soil as well. So you're moving nutrients, you're moving water. In a way, it's aeration, but by the definition, I guess it's technically not.
And I think it's become so popular. I think one of the negatives and why a lot of people skip aeration is it's a fairly labor intensive activity, where the liquid aeration is much more like our normal, herbicide or fertilizer liquid applications. One pass over the yard, water it in, and so it's pretty easy and less labor intensive. I do think that the combination of mechanical and also liquid aeration would be a great way to go. If you say you did a mechanical aeration and then followed it up with a liquid aeration, it would help even, increase that movement of nutrients and other materials down into the soil. So it would be a good thing to use in combination, but I don't really think it's the tell-all answer. I think the one thing that you're going to run into is you're not doing anything about the thatch. So you're going to continue to, yes, you're moving water. We have good penetration of our watering into the soils. We're adding the humates and the other beneficial parts of the liquid aeration formulation, but you're not doing anything about the thatch. So you're going to continue, especially in the cool season market, to accumulate thatch. And, you get to a point, now we start to get some disease issues when we have excessive thatch. So there's some other things that could come into play if we don't, look at the thatch.
So you bring up a good point, which is making it part of a program, doing it in conjunction. You do the mechanical, you do the liquid. There's also the question that we get often, which is how frequent or what is the timing that I should do my aeration. And it really comes down to a variety of different factors, and it's going to be different for everybody. But looking at your soil type is going to have an impact on it. If you've got a heavy clay yard, you're probably going to want to get out and do it more. If there's a lot of heavy traffic or
Sure.
foot traffic, if you're doing maintenance on your yard with heavy machinery, you're going to want to get out and aerate a little bit. If you've got sand, maybe not as often, maybe once a year would be enough for you.
And if you had a sandy based soil, that's where the liquid aeration type products probably do a little bit better, just because you're just trying to move stuff into the soil. We don't have to deal with the compaction. So, you talked about the soil types. That kind of leads into our next topic, and that's something that we can do in the fall. It's a good time of the year to do some soil testing if we haven't throughout the season. I know a lot of the customers that do frequent soil testing that I work with will test in the fall. We'll get the results back. We'll kind of look at what we did the year prior, and then we'll make adjustments in our programs for the upcoming season. So it's a good time to do some testing. One of the things that you can do at that time is you could do not only the chemical testing, but you could also do the physical properties testing, which would then give you that data for what your soil type is. So, soil's broken down into three components: sand, silt, and clay. There's a percentage. Once we get above about 30% clay, you start to really get some heavily compacted hard soils. So you could also do that in the fall when you do your soil testing.
Yeah, soil testing is huge, and you get information about your pH, you get information about organic materials that are in the soil percentages, and There's so many things that you can adjust in the fall when it comes to your soils to help improve root growth in the fall, and then eventually your springtime growth, and just moving into the following season.
Sure. Well, and it's a great time, if we look at our soil reports and the way that they're going to come back. Kevin and I look at soil reports all the time, but essentially they're going to tell you what you have, and then what the desired levels would be, and whether you're deficient or not, or excessive. You could get any of those pieces of information. So if you're, say, low in potassium or high in calcium, magnesium, etc., any of the micro or minor nutrients, you would be able to adjust those. And it's a good time of the year to do that, because a lot of those products, if you say they recommended Sulpamag, potassium sulfur based product, you would be able to put that down. They break down kind of slow compared to what we're traditionally used to seeing with fertilizers, where we're focusing on the nitrogen portion of that fertilizer. But you'd be able to adjust those, make those applications. So that's a good time of the year to do it. They break down over the winter. You get to utilize those nutrients in the next growing season.
So as we get into timing of fall practices, aerating, maybe you're doing some overseeding, you've got some fertilizer that you're looking at. What would be your 3-step process for aerating, seeding, fertilizing? Is that the order, or do you mix it up at all?
No, I think that's a great order, Kevin, because when I look at it, when I would put programs together for people, one, doing the aeration first gets the soil opened up, allows materials to move in. It also gives a good home for a seed bed. Seed falling into those little aeration holes in those areas where we've opened up the soil, we're getting better soil contact. If we don't, say, have a nice, a slit seeder, then this is a good technique to seed into the aeration holes. It's also a good time to put down your fall fertilizer, at least your first application. And it's a time where you're able to get, again, the fertilizer down into the soil, because you've opened it up and you have all those open spaces. And one thing you have to remember when you're looking at aeration is the soils, it's dynamic, it's moving. So you might aerate one day and have nice 3-inch holes. We got plugs all over the yard, but that closes up really fast. So it doesn't stay open very long. So timing that aeration followed by overseeding and followed by fertilizer is a good process to make sure that we get a good seeding and we get good germination, and then we also get our fertilizer down to the soil. So
before we get into the fertilizer talk, that was one of the questions that somebody brought up, and you kind of touched on. The soil's dynamic, it's moving. Is aerating a way of kind of smoothing out your yard? I would think that it maybe locally can help in certain situations, but you would need to remove a lot of soil and have some rollers.
And I've had some customers and people try to utilize that technique, but it really wasn't effective. What I found is that at the time we do our aeration, which again opens up everything, if we do like a top dress, a sand organic matter, or a sand with a little bit of normal soil and some organic matter, and top dress those areas, smooth those areas out, and then seed into that bedding, that's a good way to fill in some low spots in your yard. I've done that a number of times. A lot of times what you'll have happen is they'll come in, especially new construction, they'll come in and they'll grade everything out, they'll sod or seed, and they'll go, well, around the sprinkler heads where the trenching's been done, any place where that soil was opened up and disturbed much deeper than throughout the entire yard, you can get some settling in some low spots. So that's a good way to top dress those areas, bring them back to grade, and seed into that bed so that you can get good germination and level those areas out. So, but I like to do it with sand and organic matter, because it holds water and the seed germinates well and establishes in it quickly.
Well, and then you're not going to have compaction issues like you would if you had all clay yard. So
and the issue with it, I've seen this happen as well, is if you use the wrong soil, if you use too tight of a clay based soil that they bought at the garden center, or you can actually cap off, and now all your roots are going to stay up at the top because they can't go through that layer that you've used to try. So you want to use something that's going to have easy movement through it so that we don't cap the yard off.
Mm-hmm. So fertilizing, we've talked about the seeding. Most of the time your yard is going to need some type of starter fertilizer when you are overseeding.
Sure.
But if your soil report says you've got plenty of phosphorus, is that necessary?
It really isn't. I mean, you could do a small maintenance amount, maybe a half a pound of phosphorus from a 1-to-1-to-1. You look at a lot of the starter fertilizers, and then they'll be almost like a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 nitrogen to phosphorus ratio. So if you have a bunch of phosphorus in your soil, just put a little bit down. And if you're going to able to choose, try to find a product with monoammonium phosphate as the phosphorus source. Breaks down, is more readily available quicker. So otherwise you could just use your traditional. I mean, we have so many blends that are in that 1-to-1-to-1, 11-11-11, 14-14-14 type of products that would be a great for overseeding. When you're doing some seed work in the fall.
So fall fertilization is very important. You're setting yourself up for the following season, and there's chance that you put quite a bit of your fertilizer for the year down in the last 2 or 3 months of the
Sure.
season.
Oh yeah.
If you're seeding, that's a different story. But let's say you're not seeding, you just want to get out, make sure that your roots are storing up some nice energy for the following season. You're probably going to want to get started in the northern states somewhere around September 1 through September 15th. And as you go south, maybe you move that back 15 or 30 days.
Yeah. And that's something that people should know, especially in the northern part, Kevin, is that when we got multiple days above 90 degrees throughout the summer, we actually lose root mass. And you can see where you have really good root mass. Remember, cool season grass kind of grows as a 2-hump camel. It has a period in the spring where you get a nice boost in growth, both leaf and root. And then you get one in the fall. So in that middle, in the hot time of the year, we lose root mass. And they do studies, and they can actually measure how much root mass you have. And it happens around that 90-ish degree weather. So we've had that all summer, all over the United States. So we've lost root mass. Now we're getting into that fall time where we want to give the plant some nutrition, and especially nitrogen, to help put energy into the root system, to help recover that root system so we can make it through winter and we're ready to come out and green up early in the spring.
So we're looking at the first week of September or so, first 2 weeks in certain parts of the country, the last part of the month in different other parts of the country. What is that first app going to consist of? We're looking at some slow release and some organic material.
That's a way I like to go. One of the things, especially this goes back to what we talked about with the soil reports, they're going to tell you what your level of organic matter is. In some parts of the country, it's 5 to 8%. So we really don't need to add extra organic matter. Other parts, like where I live here in Colorado, I see a lot of soil reports where the organic matter is 1 to 2%. So it's on the deficient side. So it's a nice time to put it down. We have a lot of blends that we've developed at Winfield where we utilize biosolids or poultry waste as the filler. So there's always a little bit of organic matter in some of our blends. If we have extremely low organic matter, I would probably then do just a straight organic app. Both of these materials are economical. It's not super expensive. And I have people go out 8 to 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet to try to get some more organic matter into the soils. So if you have sandy soils, low in organic matter, you're not holding, it seems like you water all the time. This is also something to note, that organic matter does help to hold on to water. It's just how the molecule, as they start to break down these big carbon-based chains, so that would help with your water holding capacity as well. That's kind of what organic matter does in the soil. So it's a great time to put it down. Slow release, same type of thing. If we put it down and we get to a certain temperature, a lot of the slow release at lower soil temperatures stop breaking down. So we have carryover of that slow release nitrogen to the spring. So even if we're not able to get out and make our early spring application, we know the residual, we got some nitrogen in the bank from our fall application. So it's important to remember, especially for cool season turf, how important that fall application is to get good spring green up. And ultimately, that's what everybody wants. You come out from winter, you want your yard to be the first yard on the block that greens up, and you look at your neighbor, Brown. Yep, he didn't fertilize in the fall as efficiently and as well as you did, so you get better spring green up.
So we're looking at probably somewhere around half to 3/4 of a pound for that September application, whether
Yep.
you're doing organic
Hmm.
or, some type of U-Flex or other nitrogen slow release.
Yep. Yep.
Um, then in the fall, like late fall, maybe a month after that first fall application, you're going to go with some quick release nitrogen, and you
Correct.
probably going to want to stay around that same percentage of nitrogen, right?
You're going to want to stay, yeah. And a lot of people will put down straight nitrogen, so there won't be any phosphorus or potassium. So again, if we have a deficiency, I try to adjust it into that September application. And what you see is this is kind of what's called a dormant application, where we started this, we've cooled down enough, our night temperatures are cold enough that we're not getting the top growth, but the root system is still active. So if we apply now, all that energy, we're not mowing it off every week because we're not getting the top growth because of the cooler soil temperatures and the cooler nighttime temperatures, but we'll get good root mass development. And we'll store all that energy. Again, we store all that energy in the fall with these applications. Then we're able to get the payback the next spring. And we green up early. One of the things that I see is that that's a time where people can put down ammonium sulfate. We'll get some acidifying effect. So again, back to our soil reports, we talked about if you have a high pH is above 7.58, then this is a great time to utilize ammonium sulfate as that application to get some acidification in our soils.
And also touching on pH that's a difficult thing to adjust in your soil. A lot of times, if you're one way or the other significantly,
Yeah.
it's going to take a few applications, maybe even years before you get to that optimal 6.5, 7 level.
And in many cases, in areas where we have much higher alkaline soils throughout the central Texas, Oklahoma, out through the western United States, you just do it all the time. So when we build blends, a lot of times we'll utilize ammonium sulfate in our blends. We'll utilize sulfate of potash as our potassium. So just trying to always pick up a little sulfur and acidification along the way. But again, like you said, it's nothing you're going to fix overnight. So doing small amounts all the time gives you a better response.
And people that are watching this are probably doing their soil testing. They probably have a good understanding of their soil pH, and they're probably already making those adjustments. If not, just understand it's going to take some time.
It's going to take some time, and it's not a quick fix, and it doesn't happen overnight.
For sure. Last on the list, I guess, of things to discuss is some weed control. So that's also a very important part of a fall program for your lawn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we have to realize in many of especially our perennial weeds, where we had a big spring crop of dandelions and they came up and they all went to seed. So we have all that seed available. As we start to cool down, they germinate and they start to grow just like our turf grass starts to recover from the hot time of the year. So what they'll do is you'll have those weeds, they'll be down in the canopy. You won't see them because, again, the yellow flower from the dandelions, what sets off the customer, sets off the homeowner. I have weeds all over. Well, you have them in the fall too. So it's a prime time to be able to make applications. They're smaller, they're less established, they have a weaker root system, and the herbicides will be more effective. And you can usually use a lower rate to control these weeds at this time of the year. So it's an ideal time. And when you look at those properties where you're like, everybody's got dandelions coming up in the spring, they're all yellow and everybody's trying to get out and they're making calls to their applicators or trying to do their own applications to control the weeds. You'll see those properties that have no weeds. That's usually what they did. They did a good fall application. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that at these fall applications, we can also add a pre-emergent into the tank. The post-emergent and the pre-emergent can be applied together. So you can kill two birds with one stone and be able to have good pre-emergent weed control. Prodiamine, all your barricade formulations, gallery, these products are designed so that they can be applied in the fall and still effective the next spring as the soil temperatures come up. So there's actually the labels will talk about how much material to apply to give you given X number of months. So we can adjust the rates and do these in the fall So we're going out to control our post-emergent. We can throw our pre-emergent in. So in the spring, when it's sometimes if you're getting bad weather, whatever the cause is, that it's hard to make the applications in the spring, we can make them in the fall when it's a little bit easier and get a good pre and post-emergent weed control.
Yeah, that's great. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that because lawn care companies are going out. It's a springtime. We're going to do a pre-emerge. But a lot of times they're doing that because if they did it in the fall, they might not have the customer sign up in the spring.
Exactly. That's a tough one when you're on the commercial side. That's hard for people at the time. You don't want to, you give all that extra applications and material in the fall, and then you don't have the customer. But your homeowners, they need to understand that would be the best way to do it. One of the products that you've had some success with, Kevin, is Defender. Do you want to explain just a little bit of what it is, its timing, and obviously its number one weed that it controls, dandelions?
Yeah, dandelions for sure. It'll do some clover too. We've seen that, being controlled pretty well over the years in some studies. But Corteva has Defender. It's a great product for dandelion control. One of the timing issues is you have to hit it before the plant flowers. Yep. So you're really not going to get any control if you wait too long in the spring. And that's where a lot of the lawn care companies have issues. Is there's so many lawns they got to hit. They can't get to all of them with the Defender. Right. But you can use a fall application with Defender as well. And so like Rob was discussing earlier, you're going to have those plants down in the canopy. If you can get this Defender out, you got to look at the label and make sure you do it when it's cool at the right time of the year. So we're getting into that maybe mid to late September, early October in certain parts of the country.
Yep.
It's going to do a great job, and you're not going to have those dandelions popping up like everybody else on your block.
And we could also, just like I mentioned with our other post-emergent products, we could combine it with our pre-emergents and make one application and not have to make multiple applications.
One of the benefits of Defender, it's a non-2,4-D product.
Right,
so
sure.
A lot of states have restrictions. You can only do so many broadcast applications with 2,4-D. It's a little bit different with the spot applications or spot treatments, but non-2,4-D products like Defender are going to become more and more popular. And I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't taken off already, just because of how effective it can be on dandelions specifically. And that's like the number one weed for homeowners.
Right. So no, that's some great information. So essentially, if we look at kind of what we've talked about today, aeration, overseeding, fertilization, and weed control are all activities that can be done in the months of September and October throughout most of the United States, and what is going to pay off dividends for the next season. So
for sure.
The last thing we wanted to go over was we've been Kevin and I are sent questions throughout our e-com site, and anyone that would like to send a question, we're going to try to start answering those questions at the end of the podcast. So, the question was, what's the best insecticide product on the market that gives you the best bang for the buck, or the best dollar value? So what comes to mind when I think about that question is the differences between your imidacloprid products and acelepryn. And I think the key is there's different timing with those. There's also a different cost associated with that. The imidacloprid applications are going to be more economical, but you need to get the product out at the right time. The acelepryn is going to give you a little broader control. You can miss the window a little bit, but and you will get a little bit of curative, but it's at a higher price point per acre. So when you try to answer that question, it's really important to understand, what are you trying to do, and what is the insect that we're trying to control? Is it grubs? Is it sod webworm? Is it Japanese beetle? What are we trying to control? And that's going to help us steer us into the either of those. The other thing that we need to think about is also how we're going to put the product down. What's nice about these products, and both of them fit into this category, you can make liquid applications, but they're both also put on fertilizer carriers. So there are ways to do granular applications. So if you don't have the ability to do a good liquid application, maybe all of the liquid applications you do around your home are done with a backpack, you're spot spraying weeds, you're keeping the the weeds and the cracks on the driveway under control. So you just have a couple of small applicators. It's not really the way to put down a good blanket application of an insecticide. So granulars are probably going to be your best bet. But really, that's something that it depends on what you're trying to control and where you're at in the United States.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is I've seen it work best both ways as a program. This needs to be a repetitive application because a lot of times you're not going to control all the grubs the first application you put it down. There's going to be those second, third instars potentially in the soil waiting, and the chemical is only going to knock out those really, really small grubs. So getting on a program, doing 2-3 years in a row, then you shouldn't be having any more grub issues in your yard.
Because I think one of the things we struggle with, and we get questions about this, is that if you're in an area that has turf, insect issues, grubs, etc., wherever you're at in the United States, Japanese beetles are what we're having a problem with where I live now, as a species. But it's hard to do curative. Curative insecticides in the turf are difficult. We only have a couple of choices. Dilox is one that's always available. People use bifenthrin on granulars, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do curative applications. Plus, at that time, we may lose some turf. So now we're going back through and overseeding, going back through everything we've already discussed, trying to reclaim those areas in the fall. But it's tough to do curative. Get yourself on a program to be preventatively try to control these if it is an issue in your area.
And with home lawns, a lot of times if you have a grub issue, you may think it's some other issue like a nutrient deficiency or an irrigation problem. So by the time you actually figure out what the problem is, it may be too late and you've lost quite a bit of turf.
Well, and what we're experiencing right now in the Denver metro area with the Japanese beetle issues is that where we have outbreaks going on, they're not a beetle that does a lot of damage to the turf. You see a little bit of decline, but it does, like you said, Kevin, it looks like a bad irrigation or we need to turn, it's hot out. So it looks like we have some drought stress. But when they fly, then the one thing that they do, and some of the other beetles that we deal with don't, is they feed on the ornamentals. So you start to see damage to your trees, your garden, your annual flowers from the Japanese beetle that was in the turf. So preventative always better than curative with insect control.
Definitely.
The last question we had was asking about germination. So the question was, I got a 50-pound bag of high performance tall fescue. Should it germinate in 4 days with proper watering? So what I did is I looked up the average germination rates for our 3 common seeds that we are currently selling: fescue, bluegrass, and ryegrass. They do some different things in the South with St. Augustine and Bermuda where they actually sprig. So that's a whole nother topic for another day. But
we'll have to bring somebody else on to discuss that.
We'll have to have a southern guest. Kevin and I both live in the cool season northern market. So fescue, 12 to 13 days is typically your average germination time. Bluegrass takes a little bit longer. That would be 14 to 28 days for germination. And then ryegrass is the quickest of the cool season common lawn grasses, 5 to 8 days. One thing to note with all of our grass seeds specifically, we do apply PGS to the seed, and PGS is a plant growth stimulator. It's made up of 3 plant hormones, IBA, gibberellic acid, and cytokinin. And so helps improve the germination. So like with our ryegrasses specifically, we get germination in 4 or 5 days in a lot of cases if the conditions, the moisture are correct. So don't give up on your seed. If you put it down, you don't feel like it's germinating correctly. It could be based on soil temperature or it could be based on moisture. So when you're watering, don't overwater when you're trying to germinate seed, but you don't want to also underwater, because if you let it come up and then dry it out, you're going to kill your seedlings. So there's a fine line right there, but some good rules of thumb on what to expect. I was wondering when we got this question and I know when we look at some of our blends that we have on the e-com site, Kevin, they're like 90% fescue with just a tiny bit of ryegrass, correct?
We have 90% fescue with bluegrass as well.
with bluegrass as well. So we might be seeing some of the other grass seeds in those blends germinating early on, and it's probably not the fescue. It's only 4 or 5 days into after seeding, but we do have very good grass seed, good germination rates, and I think that's key. And then the addition of the PGS helps us to improve that germination.
Yeah, I would stress watering is important, especially early on. You want to make sure that that seed and the seedling stay watered properly, so you're getting good, healthy growth in the early stages of the plant development there. And then also, PGS is great. It works as a seed treatment, but we also sell it as a liquid, and you can spray it over top of thin and stressed areas at any time of the season. But specifically, if you're not overseeding, right before you aerate, and maybe even after aeration to help fill in those holes, PGS is a great product to utilize.
Excellent. Well, I think we've covered everything that we
did
set out to cover.
I've only got one question for you, Rob.
Okay.
How well do you think the Packers are going to do this year?
The pack is back. Always an optimist. Now, I will tell you guys also that Kevin is in Minnesota. I'm in Colorado, and but a Packer fan, grew up in Wisconsin, and
I'm a Bronco fan.
If I'm not mistaken, the first game of the season is in Minnesota. Pack Vikings. So I'm saying the Pack by 3.
Okay. It'll be interesting. I'm not so sure. Vikings look pretty strong this year. Not that I'm a Vikings fan. We'll see how the Broncos do as well. So
thanks everyone.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.